All right, we've talked about prepositions and verbs and adjectives and adverbs, and now it's time to talk about clauses and conjunctions. Mostly we're doing both at the same time because they're kind of integral to each other. So, first off, and you should be taking notes as we go through this video, what is a clause? A clause is simply something that contains a group of words that contains both a subject and a verb. There's a couple different kinds of clauses, but we're going to just stick to two today, all right? And so the first one of that is an independent clause. So an independent clause has a subject and a verb, like all the clauses we're going to talk about, and it's a complete thought. It could be a sentence by itself. So, for example, I walked. I is the subject, walked is the verb. But it's a clause, it's an independent clause, it's also a sentence because it has those two aspects. And we can add to that. Yesterday I walked down the street. Still a clause, still an independent clause. All that we've added is an adverb and a prepositional phrase. Yesterday I walked jauntily down the street. I added an adverb, but it still didn't change what type of clause this is. So an independent clause, you can just think of that as it's a sentence. All right? The second type of clause is a dependent clause, and that also has a subject and a verb, but it's not a complete thought because it has something called a subordinating conjunction at its beginning. So any independent clause can become a dependent clause by adding a subordinate conjunction, which is why we're going to talk about these together. So the subordinate conjunction is always at the beginning of that independent clause. These types of clauses can't stand by themselves because they're not a sentence on their own. Instead, they have to be attached to a main clause or another independent clause. Otherwise, they're a fragment. All right? So let me give you an example. Because I walked down the street. Here's my subject still. Here's my verb still. Because I've added this subordinating conjunction on it, which happens to be because, I've now turned it into something less than a sentence, a fragment. All right? So like I said on the previous slide, it has to be attached to an independent clause. My foot was hurting because I walked down the street. Okay, so I've got an independent clause here that's not underlined, and I've got a dependent clause here that's underlined. And at the beginning of every dependent clause that we're going to talk about for now, you're going to have a subordinating conjunction, which is what's bolded here. I can also flip these. Because I walked down the street, my foot was hurting. So now I've got the dependent clause first, and then the independent clause. The only difference you might notice was I had a comma, and I'll put that in a further slide when we get into the subordinating conjunctions. But that's the only difference. You can put them in whatever order. I prefer this order in terms of my writing. I find myself writing a lot like this, but it really doesn't matter. They're both equally grammatically correct. So let's just take a look at whether or not if you can identify an independent or a dependent clause. While another letter will be delivered by the postal system. Hopefully, you can see that this is a dependent clause because we've got this word while here. If we were to remove it, another letter will be delivered by the postal system. That's an independent clause. So this one is dependent. It would be fun. Independent. We've got our subject, and our two verbs would be. During summer vacation, students could sign up to ride for the Pony Express. So we've got our subject, students, and could sign our verbs. So it has a subject and a verb, so it's definitely a clause. And students could sign up to ride for the Pony Express during summer vacation. No matter what order we put this in, because it could be moved over here, it's an independent clause. A rider traveled a great distance before he stopped for the night. One part of this is independent and one part is dependent. Can you guess which part? A rider traveled a great distance is an independent clause. Before he stopped for the night is a dependent clause. We could have switched this around and said before he stopped for the night, comma, a rider traveled a great distance. So here's my dependent clause and my subordinating conjunction is before. Since our mail delivery is so slow. Not a sentence, it's a fragment, so that makes this a dependent clause. Since is my subordinating conjunction. Our delivery is our subject. Is the verb. So we would need to attach this to another independent clause. Something like, since our mail delivery is so slow, comma, I didn't get your letter. So with that in mind, let's talk about what a conjunction is. A conjunction is just a word used to connect parts of a sentence. And there are 3 types. Sorry, that's a typo there. So that's why this little cartoon here is supposed to be amusing, because it's joining them together. So first type, coordinating conjunctions. These are the ones that you've probably heard the most about and are the fanboys. You place these between words, phrases, clauses, or sentences, which is another word for clauses, of equal rank. So what do I mean by equal rank? Well, if we look at words, I have a dog and a cat. So I'm connecting 2 words with the same, with one of the coordinating conjunctions, rather than say, I have a dog and I don't know. But it's basically they're on equal footings, is the main thing there. Phrases. He was on the phone and writing a letter. These are both phrases that we can combine using the and. And then a clause, I went to the store and I bought 14 items. The only thing you'll notice that's different with this one is this comma here, and I'll get to that in 1 second. But otherwise, we're using the same exact coordinating conjunction on these. So when connecting independent clauses, like this over here, I went to the store and I bought 14 items, this is an independent clause and this is an independent clause because they're both sentences. There is a comma before the coordinating conjunction. So this comma indicates that everything before the comma and the coordinating conjunction is its own sentence, and so is everything after. So if I have a sentence like, I think you'd enjoy the party, when I put this comma and this but here, because that's a coordinating conjunction, I'm saying this is a sentence. I think you'd enjoy the party. Yes, it is. I could put a period there. And I don't mind if you stay home as a sentence. So this kind of exists. It doesn't really integrate into the other clauses. It's kind of standing apart from them and connecting them, saying sentence, comma, coordinating conjunction, sentence, and I made it into one more sophisticated sentence. The 7 coordinating conjunctions that you should memorize are usually remembered as the fanboys. So that's for, and when I say for here, it means because. So if I said he left the party, comma, for he was tired, that's how you would use it. So the other meaning of for, I looked for him, that's a preposition. Then we've got and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. Obviously, some of these are used more than others. I don't think you're really rocking nor that often. But moving on, the second kind of conjunction is the subordinating conjunction. I'd say these are the trickiest. So the subordinating conjunction combines clauses by reducing the importance of one clause, changing it from independent to dependent. And they're always at the beginning of the clause. So, and the other thing to add is sometimes these are more than one word, like even though or in order that, and I'll give you a list further on down here. So for example, let's say you've got 2 independent clauses. The man walked the dog was happy, okay? If I want to combine that into one sentence, I could use a coordinating conjunction, but it's more sophisticated to take a subordinating conjunction and put it at the beginning, and then you're going to have a sentence like, since the man walked the dog, here's my subordinating conjunction, the dog was happy. So I've taken this and tacked it on to this independent clause. This has become a dependent clause that's underlined here, and now I can attach it to this independent clause here. So the subordinating conjunction is a different way of combining those 2 sentences, and that makes this one have to attach to another one. So as you might have noticed, when the subordinating conjunction is on the first clause in a sentence, there is a comma between the 2 clauses. So this is my dependent clause, comma, independent clause. That's always the way it goes. Not the other way around, though. So when the subordinating conjunction is the second clause in the sentence, there's no comma. The dog was happy since the man walked the dog. All right? Because we're not pausing the same way. I've just paused there artificially, but instead you would say the dog was happy since the man walked the dog. And you would obviously revise the dog in the second time and say him. But here, since the man walked the dog was happy. There's an automatic pause is what you're kind of indicating with your comma. Here's a list, and there's one on your paper, of some of the subordinating conjunctions. There's a lot of them, and I would not recommend that you memorize them. There are certain ones that might be worth kind of familiarizing yourself more, because, although, while, if, after, but instead, it's much better if you can just kind of understand how it works, which is it's added to an independent clause, it becomes dependent. So if you are wondering if something is a subordinating conjunction, you could try removing it and seeing if that makes the part of the clause now independent. So if I have this sentence, while another letter will be delivered by the postal system, and I take while away, now I have another letter will be delivered by the postal system. Well, that's a sentence. So I don't have to have while memorized to understand that it just did what a subordinating clause does. So what I want you guys to understand is what each of these things does. And takes two, or a coordinating conjunction takes two equal partners and connects them. Subordinating conjunction takes two things that are equal and makes one lesser. So this is exactly where it's making it lesser. And then the last type, and the least common, I'd say, is the correlative conjunctions. So these are kind of like tag team conjunctions because there's two of them in the same sentence. So they're always in pairs, and you have to use both of them in different places in the sentence to make them work in the order that I'm giving them to you. They get their names from the fact that they work together, co, prefix, and relate one equal sentence element to another. So I've given you on your paper a list of some of the ones that I think are the most important, and I'm only going to hold you mostly accountable for those. But here's some others. As, bowling isn't as fun as skeet shooting. Those are correlative conjunctions. Or such and that. Such was the nature of their volatile relationship that they never would have made it even if they'd wanted to. So we've got two different, these are pairs, and that might not realize that. We also have as many as, and as. There are as many curtains as there are windows. So that one's not one you're going to use that much, but here's one that you are going to maybe use. She'd rather play the drums than sing. Rather and than are correlative conjunctions. So you need to look at the ones that are on your paper, and I would say that one's another one that you should know. Here's a little joke. I just learned what conjunctions are. And, that's a coordinating conjunction there. So now try the practice on your sheet, and we will go over this further in class. If you have questions, write them down now while you just listen to this so that later you can ask me about them.